Hey everyone, Disappointed Giant here. So welcome to my second tier list video. The first one I did a month or two ago was on melee items, and this time we're going to go through all of the ranged items in Dead Cells. As you can probably already see, there's less ranged items than melee items, so this video might clock in a little bit less than the 2.5 hours that the other one was. But yeah, I'm stoked to get into this. Doing the first video was really fun because basically I was able to just kind of sit here and talk shop and just chat and, talk about some things. And ironically, it was like the easiest video that I've put together because it didn't have any fancy editing or anything like that. So of course the longest video I have was the quickest to produce. But I've actually taken this month off. So I'm recording this in January 30th, 2024, which is weird to say. I took the month off from video stuff. I have some ideas of things that I've kind of got on the back burner. I got a couple of other smaller tutorials that I got coming out probably in the next couple months. One's a shields video. I have kind of like a secret that I've been sitting on for a while that I'm gonna put out in a video, and then not Dead Cells related, but at some point later this year I'm going to put together a big beginner's guide for another game that I'm way into, another rogue light-ish sort of game, but that's something that I can return to later. If I start talking about it now, I'll just get lost in space and I won't be able to bring my way back. But I have some good stuff planned, and since I've taken the month off, I'm going to use this video as a way to kind of reconnect, get some thoughts out there, connect with some folks, and then we'll take the year as it comes. But since it is the beginning of the year, belated Happy New Year. I hope everybody is well. I hope that the past month has brought you some good things, good changes, good vibes. When the year ends and the new one begins, it's kind of a nice time to take a breath, recenter, and just see how life goes, right? So before we get into this, I want to go over some of the, I don't want to say rules, these are just kind of like guidelines, and these are the same guidelines that I had for my melee video. So the audio is uncut, single take, no script, so I'm just going to talk. I'm going to talk until I get through all of these. If I make mistakes, then I make mistakes. If I say something really funny or really smart, that's just because I said something really funny or really smart. Just going with the vibe. To err is human, and I feel like having a conversational video it's nice. Almost everything else I do is scripted, so it's nice to just kind of, not read off of a screen and just kind of vibe, The next thing is these items are not ranked by what is quote unquote best, and I'm ranking them by how often I use them. So similar to my melee tier list, you'll see that the categories here are not qualifiable or quantifiable, however you want, whatever it is. These are just, it goes by how often I use these things, right? So instead of S, A, C, F, whatever, we have time-based things, right? Always means I almost always take this. If I see something in this tier pop out of a chest, there's a good chance I'm going to take it and recycle what else I had. Not often, it's something that every once in a while I'll pop it out, but I usually skip over it, and I think you can kind of figure out the rest, and we'll go into this more as the video goes on. But I just want to reiterate that, again, this is just personal preference, right? These are the things that I use and the frequency in which I use them, and it doesn't have any overall bearing on the quote unquote rating of an item. Everything can be good, and here we go. And the next thing, everything can be good. This is not definitive. So there are certain situations where there are items that work great in biomes and maybe not so great in bosses, or vice versa, or maybe there needs to be specific secondary items to make something work. So everything in their own right does have a space in the game to serve a purpose and to be good or enjoyable, or, to have value. So anything that I say is something I always take might be something you don't like. It might be an item that is not exactly useful all the time, but just based on my preference, I take it all the time, and vice versa. There might be something that I don't take often, or I rarely take, and it's a banger, right? So this is just, again, just my own preference, and, you know, anything that I say here is completely subjective. I'm going to go through the main weapons of the game first, and then I'm going to go through the DLCs in order. So this is the same thing that I did with my melee video. I'm going to have timestamps in the description, as I did before. I'm going to chunk everything out into sections, so that way if there's a specific item that you want to see, or if you want to go to a specific DLC to see what ranged items came from that, just click on the descriptions below. You don't have to watch all of this at once. I don't know how long it's going to be. It probably, like I said, is probably not going to be as long as the melee one, but it might be a little bit chunky. So if you want to skip around, please feel free. Along the lines here, there are 2 5BC ranged items. So I'm not going to go into spoilers about where these items are found, what enemies drop them. I'm not going to talk about the levels. I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. I am going to talk about the names, and I'm going to talk about their functions. So if you are not interested in watching that part of the video, I suggest you skip past it. The tricky thing is that these items are in the image. They're in the tier list. So you will see those items if you are watching the video. But again, if you don't want to hear about them, you can skip ahead. And then finally, I'm going to rank these alphabetically. So what that means is that in each of these categories, anything that's on the left doesn't mean that it's better than anything that's all the way on the right. It's just going to be alphabetical, you know? So if I were to take the first 4 here, it would be, you know, Beginner's Bow, Firebrands, Multi-nocks throwing knives, right? Doesn't mean that one's better than the other as far as the list goes. It's just easier to kind of sort things that way, and also to kind of like break down a little bit more of like that hierarchy of, you know, quote unquote good, bad, all that stuff. And I think that's it. So thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to do this. I am, you know, I've been using a lot of ranged weapons recently to kind of like get myself in the headspace for this. I'm excited. I actually took today off of work so I could do this. So this is a fantastic way for me to start my day, and hopefully this is a fantastic use of your time. So with that, we'll start with an easy one. So this is the Beginner's Bow. So Beginner's Bow is one of the 3 starting items in Dead Cells. Brutality has the rusty sword, Survival has the wooden shield, and Tactics has the Beginner's Bow. So all of these weapons serve a purpose to basically capitulate like the essence of that playstyle, if you were to just distill it down to like one function. The only purpose that this item serves, in my opinion, is to show people how to use a ranged attack and how to shoot a bow. There's an achievement, I think it's called like there's nothing wrong with these, or what's wrong with these, and basically if you beat the game with one of your starting items, you get that achievement. I do not recommend doing that with this Beginner's Bow, because like I said, it's just there to kind of show you the ropes, pardon the pun, show you the ropes, and that's it. So I'm going to put this in the rarely column, because basically take it when you first start a save file. If you've never played Dead Cells, use it, and then that's it. Move on. Next up is the Multi-nocks Bow. So, and the other thing I want to suggest is mentioned too is the first several items that I'm going through here. So Beginner's Bow down to the Frost Blast here. These are all unlocked by default. No blueprints, no cell requirements. These will pop immediately from the beginning of the game. So Multi-nocks is basically the big brother of the Beginner's Bow, or the big sibling of the Beginner's Bow. It functions very similarly. All it does is shoot arrows, but what it does is it shoots 3 arrows at a time instead of 1. Just by general item ranking as well as function, this is clearly a step up from the Beginner's Bow, and I take this item sometimes. And for me, I find myself gravitating towards this more in like the beginning of a run, right? So if you were to say maybe, I don't know, prisoner's quarters through like first boss, or maybe prisoner's quarters through biome 4 after the first boss, whatever it is. Because early on, it does good damage, helps keep me at a distance so I can preserve some HP, get some extra damage with the Tranquility mutation, whatever it is. But I don't find myself using it that much later in the game because I feel like other ranged weapons are stronger. That said, it's a pretty good item. I use it sometimes, and especially since, like I said, it's free, comes at the beginning of the game. It doesn't cost anything. It's not going to cost you anything to pick this up and give it a shot. So I use this sometimes. I'm going to put the Firebrands and the throwing knives together on the same row because both of these are, I would qualify these as secondary items or utility items, meaning that the way that the Multiple-nocks Bow can be your main item that you do the most damage with, you lean on the most. I feel like these are more support items. So that said, I do take these both a lot. So Firebrands does a little bit of damage, causes burning. Initially, this item was not that great. So I'm trying to think of when it got patched. I think it was Firebrands. Come on. There we go. I think it was like 2.4 maybe, or yeah, I think 2.4 was a balancing patch. Yeah, there we go. So initially this item was not great. It did like a tiny bit of damage and the burning damage was okay, but it really got outclassed very quickly. But ever since version 2.4, the base DPS has increased, which means as your scroll count goes up, that base DPS is also going to go up, which makes this a bit more viable. But like I was saying, this is more of a support weapon. So what I'll do is I'll throw this in the first slot and then maybe put Vampire Killer or Oiled Sword in the second slot, or I might even put Throwing Knives if I want to get two different status effects, two different dots going at the same time. So I use it a lot. I think it's really good, again, especially for like the beginning of the game. A lot of newer players kind of hit a wall or struggle a bit with the shield bearers at first because they turn around so quickly and it's kind of hard to like get in that vibe of rolling through them and attacking from behind. But with the Firebrands right off the bat, you'll be able to throw them and set them on fire regardless of what direction they're facing. So I think this is a great beginner weapon, great secondary weapon, and the throwing knives, I'm going to follow suit. The throwing knives are interesting because the way that bleed works is different from the way that burn works, or burning works, or fire, whatever you want to say. Fire is a status effect that just causes damage, right? It ramps up when you stack up the fire. You'll see like the little flames above the enemy's head, and the more flames they have, the more damage they're going to take. But with bleed, what happens is you get 5 stacks of bleed. So that means 5 little blood drops above the enemy's head. And at that point, it pops and it does a larger amount of damage. So the throwing knives are very quick, right? You can chuck them out pretty quickly. Their damage is fine. The bleeding is good, but it really helps you pop that blood stack pretty quickly, especially when you pair it with other things that cause bleeding, right? So this is brutality and tactics. So like you could take this with Cleaver, right? Cleaver is a brutality trap that causes bleeding. So if you throw Cleaver down and then an enemy's on it, you start throwing knives at them, the bleed's gonna build way quicker and it's gonna cause them to pop even sooner. So I use this a lot. Again, this is more of a secondary thing. On occasion, if I find a legendary throwing knife, I will dual wield those because legendary items allow you to have 2, right? So if you had a powerful grenade and then you find a legendary powerful grenade, you can put 1 in each slot. Normally you can only have 1 of each item in your build, but the legendaries let you do 2, which is pretty sweet. So if I find a legendary throwing knife and I have a throwing knife, I might dual wield and just start chucking them really fast. But again, other than that, it's more of like a secondary weapon, but it's really good. I like it a lot. Next up is the electric whip. So I'm conflicted on this. Early in the game, this item is amazing. Lower BCs, you know, just getting things moving, and levels that have a lot of small enemies. So think of like the ramparts with all the buzz cutters flying around. Think of the sewers, like with rats and stuff like that. But I personally feel like on its own, the damage just kind of drops off later. You can bump it up with point blank, I think. I think the base point blank is either 34% or 37%. I forget, but on its own, it's just like, it's okay. And I'm going to put this in the sometimes category. And the reason for it is, even though, like I just mentioned, the damage is just okay, the shock that it inflicts, which is another status effect, the shock is great because you can hit an enemy with the whip, and then any nearby enemies will kind of share that shock, like a little bit of lightning, get a little bit of extra damage over time with that. And I also find, and again, this could just be bias, right? I could just be taking my experiences and funneling them all into this, but I feel like this item has a higher chance of getting either double damage or quad damage than a lot of other items. I feel like this and Lightning Bolt are the two that always, like, often will have that. If you get this thing with double damage, it's really good. If you get this, an Electric Whip with quad damage, it's out of control. It's amazing. So I will take this sometimes and, like, I'll try to roll for it, right? Give me the double damage, give me the quad damage, especially again if it's later in the run. Earlier in the run, you know, I'll grab this in Prisoner's Quarters. I'll take it if it pops up. But, you know, I do kind of try to pump those extra, the extra damage on that if I can find it. But overall, it's a good weapon. You know, I think all of these here, all of the four initially unlocked kind of like damage dealing range weapons, they're all solid, as you can see, in their own right. But E-Whip's pretty good. So next up we have Frost Blast. So Frost Blast is dual stacking, or dual scaling, I should say. So it's survival and tactics. You take this with a survival build. It's great because you can use it. It almost looks like Street Fighter, like Hadouken, where the beheaded will like put his two hands together, and from his palms, the Frost Blast will come flying out. It's great to use that to freeze enemies, and then use something like the Nutcracker to get like a huge crit right off the bat. There's no ammo on Frost Blast. I'm sorry, my mouse is super sensitive, so it's moving a little bit here. There's no ammo on Frost Blast, which is great. So you can just kind of spam this to your heart's content. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it has like a nice range. The particle effects are great, and it's a pretty solid support item. So I'm going to put Frost Blast up here and sometimes. So unlike the Firebrands and the throwing knives, this is a great support item, but it doesn't really do damage. It's more of a crowd control kind of thing. It's more of a synergy setup sort of thing. You might get some affixes where, you know, enemies will bleed afterwards, so you'll get a little bit of damage there. But on the whole, this is generally like a crowd control thing. But it's good. I think it's really good. Back in the day, there used to have ammo. Again, I don't remember exactly when the ammo ended up getting dropped off it. Maybe it was, again, maybe that was 2.4. Maybe it was 1.9. There we go. Yep. So updated plenty. There used to be ammo. Now there's not. So it's good. You can just take it and spam it. Also on the wiki here, showing that Heart of Ice it's great to proc Heart of Ice too. Get some extra cooldown. So this weapon's great. Again, support. Use it if you need it. You can pop it in the backpack if you want. A lot of good stuff here. So next up, I'm going to put the Magic Bow here. So even though the Magic Bow is a crossover item with the Soul Knight game or franchise, which I'm not familiar with, this pops up really early on a fresh file. So after like a run or two, you'll notice a couple of lore rooms starting to pop up in the Prisoner's Quarters. There are 3 guaranteed lore rooms that will pop up until you take all the items in them. Once you clear those out, the everyone is here lore rooms will start to filter through, but the Magic Bow is one of the first ones that you'll see. So this item, it costs 100 cells. The blueprint's free. You'll see it in a room. It's like a little jar with kind of like some pixelated effects. And what it does is it's a very slow wind up kind of a weapon, and it shoots out 5 arrows that home. That alone is pretty sweet. And let me see if I can pull it up. Magic Bow. Here we go. So that alone is pretty sweet. The other thing that's great about this is that the more arrows that hit an enemy, the more damage the next arrow will do. So not only does this home in on enemies, but if you hit, let's say out of the 5 shots, you hit three of those arrows hit an enemy. The first one's going to do damage. The second one's going to do a little bit more damage. And then the third one's going to do a little bit more damage. I'll use this a lot. Let me pop this up. I really use this a lot. I lean into this quite often. One of the things that I'll do is I'll also put it in the backpack. And I think this is a great time for me to pause for a second. I want to talk about the backpack for a second. We're going to get back to the Magic Bow. We're going to talk about the backpack. So, I talked about Porky Pack a little bit in my melee tier video, and that's because you throw a weapon in the backpack. When you roll, it'll do the melee damage. It's good to proc certain status effects, get extra damage. Acrobata Pack really opens up tactics, gameplay, and ranged gameplay in a way that Porky Pack doesn't. So what happens is when you have the Acrobata Pack mutation, you pop a ranged item in your backpack, and then what happens is you roll, use another ranged item, and whatever's in the backpack will fire. So a good example of this is if you have Hokuto's bow in your backpack, which does it marks an enemy to do extra damage over time, and you have the Alchemic Carbine as your main item, which shoots a poison, like a poison vial at the enemy and causes like a poison cloud. You roll, you shoot the Alchemic Carbine, and along with it, the Hokuto's bow arrow will also come out, so the enemy's getting hit twice. A lot of my tactics runs have Acrobata Pack in it. It's just an incredible utility. I apologize, I should have talked about this before. I should have put this on my list of things at the beginning of the tier list because it's really important. But I love this thing, and it can help elevate certain items from being like okay or something that I wouldn't pick up a lot to something that I'll throw in the backpack, because any sort of downsides or things that take away from its utility kind of get lost because the backpack just shoots it. So, think of something like a lightning bolt where you have to stand there and charge and it will shoot out a giant lightning bolt. If you have it in the backpack, you can just roll, shoot something, and the lightning bolt just comes out from you while you're still moving. So there's a lot of really good utility here. If you do not have this, get it immediately. Get it as soon as possible. It drops from demolishers, which are the enemies that use the explosive crossbow. So they kind of look like construction workers, and they'll shoot the missiles from you from far away, and they'll kind of slam their crossbow at you. So it's a 10% drop, which means that it's fairly common. There's a good chance that you'll get this sort of early if you go through the levels where the demolishers are, and those levels are my favorite. So of course they're in the distillery. So if you're on 0BC, your best bet's to go to the distillery. I'm sorry, but that's true. Ramparts, Stilt Village, 1BC, Prisoners Quarters, 2BC. So if you don't have Acrobata Pack, get it. I'm going to be talking about it a lot during this tier list, so it's awesome. So that said, even though the Magic Bow is slow, right? So it has that slow wind up. It kind of like freezes you a bit, or like, stops you in place a bit as you're drawing the bow. If you put this in the backpack, it will immediately shoot those 5 arrows out in addition to whatever else you're shooting. I lean on this a lot. I really enjoy it. It's great with barb tips. It's great in general when you're in a level where there's just enemies like maybe a little bit higher on a platform, or if you're in the sewers and there's like a little drop off and there's enemies below you, like you can kind of use this to home in and take enemies out. I think this item's great. And again, it pops up pretty early. Unfortunately, the 100 cell cost is a bit pricey for that early in the game, because like I said, you're probably going to find this 3-4 runs into a save file, but I think it's worth it. I think it's really good. All right. So the next section, and I kind of like split these off a little bit so you can see like these are like the beginning. These are all the intro ones. Then I just have like regular bows, and then double-handed items, and then just kind of like other utility things. So I'm trying to theme this a little bit better than I did last time. During my melee video, I just started pulling stuff. I was like, oh, let's do high boosted boots. Oh, let's do flashing fans. Let's do whatever. So I'm trying to keep it a little bit more consistent. So this is the Infantry Bow, and the Infantry Bow is something that I have always enjoyed. And it's something I enjoy even more now because having point blank as a mutation is a godsend for this thing. So what the Infantry Bow does is it will do critical damage to anything that is within close range. What point blank does is it will beef up your short-ranged attacks, your short-ranged ranged attacks. So basically, these crits are really good just off the bat, but if you are running tactics and you take point blank, the crits are going to be huge. And the ammo count's pretty good. I think it's, how many ammos? 5, 6? Oh, it's 8. Yeah, so it's got 8 ammo in it. It's pretty sweet. You can pair this with like Instinct of the Master of Arms in a boss fight if you want to get some cooldown pretty easily on your skills. I just find this weapon to be incredibly useful, and there's really not a lot of situations where I would actively avoid this, right? If I have a build that's already smoking and I'm doing pretty well, I'm not going to go out of my way to change that. But if I see this and I'm just looking for a good item, maybe it pops out of a cursed chest, maybe I get a legendary with it, and my build's just kind of like cruising along, I'll take it. I think it's fantastic. And it drops pretty early. So it drops from the archers, which are in the prisoners' quarters right off the bat. You know, little Robin Hood looking guys. It's a 1.7 drop chance, which is semi-common. You will likely see this early if you haven't already. And I think it only costs 5. Yeah, and it costs 5 cells to unlock. This is a bargain, right? This is the equivalent of going through the clearance section and finding something that's like 5%. It's 95% off, and you're saying, "Oh my goodness, how did I get such a deal?" So this item's great. Highly recommend using it. And on the other side of that is, I'm going to skip a little bit here, is the Marksman Bow. So the Marksman Bow is the exact opposite of the Infantry Bow, where Infantry Bow will crit on close attacks and point blank will ramp that up. Marksman Bow crits on long range attacks. So I think the tile set it might be like 8 tiles or 5 tiles. I can't remember exactly how far. I don't know if it says it here. I don't think it says how far the tiles is, but basically like you need to be further away from an enemy in order to get the crit. As you can see here, the base DPS is about, so it's less than 1/6, or it's just about 1/6 of the crit damage. So it's not great if you're not getting a crit. This is not something that you want to get close to an enemy with and use. That said, you can pair this with Tranquility and you're going to get some pretty good damage. So there's a build, I can't remember what the player's name was. I think it's Azumala Fairy or something like that. It's someone I used to follow like years ago, several years ago when I was really getting deep into Dead Cells. And he had a video, I think it was called like the True Archer Bow or the True Archer Build or something like that. And basically what it was Marksman Bow and Infantry Bow as your 2 main items. And basically that just ensures that no matter where you are, you're getting crits. So if you're far away from enemies, you're going to get a big crit with the Marksman Bow. If you're close to enemies, you're going to get a crit with the Infantry Bow. Pair those 2 items with Tranquility and Point Blank. Third is your choice. Disengagement, Hunter's Instinct, Instinct, the Master of Arms, whatever, and you get yourself a solid build that's going to crit almost all the time. Because the Marksman Bow does require some extra space, I only take this thing sometimes, and part of it is like, I don't want to get stuck, right? So if I'm using that build, right? So if I have the Infantry Bow and I have the Marksman Bow, I'm not too worried about it. I'm not too worried about getting close to enemies because I can kind of use the Marksman Bow as the secondary. If I don't have something that I can lean on for close ranged combat, and that could be anything, it could have Firebrands, right? E-whip, whatever. I won't take the Marksman Bow. It's just too distance dependent. And as I'm sure most of us know, there's a lot of enemies in dead cells that can kind of like come in pretty quick, right? Especially with, I don't know, areas like the promenade where the outdoor sections are kind of like segmented into these little buildings with walls and stuff. So it's not always the easiest to get distance, but if you can get distance, this thing's pretty good. So I do take it sometimes. Every once in a while though, it just feels good to kind of like slowly go through a level and just pick enemies off and look at those huge crit numbers. It's great. Next up is the quick bow. So quick bow is something, it's kind of fallen out of my favor, I think is the right way to put it. So at some point, again, during another balancing patch, it might have been 2.4, and it might have just been along the way. The quick bow got nerfed. Yeah, so it got nerfed twice. So one of these nerfs would have been fine, right? Because if the critical hit does a little bit less damage, that's okay. If the critical hit condition was a little bit more, it required more arrows, that's fine. But both of these together kind of like put this in a situation where I don't use it that often. So quick bow is a bow that will do a critical hit with an arrow if there are 3 or more arrows stuck in its body. This doesn't just have to be arrows from the quick bow. It can be arrows from anything, right? So if you have a heavy crossbow and you shoot an enemy and it gets all 8 or 6 arrows in them, the quick bow will crit. Unfortunately, the damage is, I find that the damage is lacking. I don't love this as much as I used to, which is unfortunate because you can get it really early on. This is located in the prisoner's quarters, so basically at the beginning of the run, you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll kind of see like some wooden, the walls kind of cut away. There's like these little wooden planks. If you climb up that and roll through the wall on the left, you'll find the quick bow blueprint. It's $5 or $5. It's 5 cells, so you can unlock it really quickly, really easily. But again, I just don't find that the damage for me, it doesn't do it for me. I don't take this often. Every once in a while, there might be a great modifier on it. I'll see shocks explode into a toxic cloud or something along those lines, and I'll grab it based on what else I have in the build. But overall, it's not something I take often. However, do not let that dissuade you from trying this and finding this and seeing if you like it. Based on its name, as you can tell, it shoots very quickly, right? So it does have good rapid fire. So if you're fighting enemies that have lower HP and you're not even getting to that crit condition, right? If those first 2 arrows or those first 3 hours are taking an enemy out, it doesn't really matter that much, right? So don't let me push you away from this if this is an item that you like, or if you haven't found it and you want to try it out, give it a shot. But just personally, especially based on my history where it used to be stronger and it was something I used to use all the time, it's something that I don't take too often. Next up is Nerves of Steel. So this is a bow that similar, I don't want to say it's similar to the Marksman Bow because they're completely different. But what it does have is it has similar crit to base damage ratio. So let's see. So here we're looking at, so it's about a quarter, give or take. So if you charge the bow, right? So if you hold the attack button for, I don't know exactly what the timing is. There you go. If you charge it for 0.3 seconds and you let go, it will do a crit. It will do shoot an arrow, does a big crit. If you don't, right? So if you let go, if you just press the button, or if you let go too early, or if you let go too late, it will still shoot the same arrow, but the damage is really disappointing. So this is one of those, it's not really high risk. It's like medium risk, high reward kind of things. The rhythm that you can use to kind of like get into the flow of the crits it's not difficult, right? It's not like rhythm and bazooki where it's really challenging to kind of get those crits to repeat. I find myself being able to crit with this thing pretty easily. And it reminds me, what bow is it? Oh, there's a Hades bow. I feel like it's just the bow in general, where if you draw back and you shoot at a certain time, it will do extra damage. So this is kind of like in that same sort of vibe. So in order to find this though, you have to get a specific end point of the ramparts. So as far as the level generation goes, if the boss door is all the way on the right, you can't get this. But there is a generation here, and you can see it in the picture. Yo, that got huge. But that's a really big picture. But basically, at the end of the ramparts, you can see that there's a gap, and then there's an invisible platform that's maybe like, it doesn't immediately start, right? So imagine if it's just like, I don't know, a quarter of this is air, and then the platform, and then the next part's air. Best thing to do here is to just throw a grenade out if you see the end of the level to see if the platform's there. You can detach your head, you can throw a turret. If it hits the middle of the air, just jump, roll, and go through this door on the right to get the blueprint. I think it's great. I think this item is incredibly solid. I don't use it all the time, but I do use it a lot. So I'm gonna pop it up here. And again, it's not, I wouldn't qualify this as like a high skill item. And of course, if you're having difficulty with the crits, I am not saying that you should be better. I'm just saying personally, you know, I find it like medium skill, again, medium skill, high reward. Those crits are really nice. Next up is the bow and endless quiver. And I like this item's icon because the shape of the bow is an infinity sign to show you that it never runs out of ammo, which is pretty sweet. So that's the gimmick, right? This bow does not have an ammo. It doesn't have a quiver, so you can just constantly shoot arrows. You don't have to worry about reloading. You don't have to worry about running out of arrows. You don't have to worry about parrying to get your arrows back. You can just constantly shoot it. The way this works is that the first two, I think it's the first two arrows do normal damage, and then the third arrow is a little bit slower and it does crits. The damage is fine, right? The damage is fine. I don't think it's as poor, or not poor is not the right word. I don't think it's as disappointing as the quick bow is, but I also don't think it's as strong as a Nerves of Steel, right? If we're going to kind of put this after those two that I just talked about. I take this sometimes, and I make sure I alphabetize correctly. I take it sometimes because sometimes it's just nice to have a bow where you do not have to worry about ammo, right? And especially if you're getting good synergies, you have other skills or a secondary that's doing additional damage. You might not have to lean on this as much. So that way, like the lower-ish damage isn't going to be a big deal. But again, having no quiver, having as much ammo as you need, it's good in boss fights too. You know, especially, again, you pair something like this with Tranquility. You're going to be able to fight the concierge from all the way across the arena. No ammo, extra damage. So yeah, I'll take this thing sometimes. Again, this is, aside from the fact that it doesn't have ammo, it's just kind of like middle of the road. So next up is the ice bow. So the ice bow is basically an arrow, an arrow-based, ammo-based version of something like the Frost Blast. So this will shoot across the screen like a regular bow and arrow, and any enemies that it hits, it will freeze. You can get shots pierce the first target, you can get shots pierce all enemies. I think the ice bow, in my opinion, I think it's not really, I feel like it doesn't get the cred that it needs or it deserves, because there's something to be said about an item that can immediately, I mean, the draw on this thing's really quickly. You can immediately freeze something, put yourself in a better position to either, you know, use Heart of Ice and get cooldown, or, you know, run away from an elite that's coming after you, like whatever it is. I love the ice bow. I love the ice bow, and I'm going to pop it up here. And usually, as far as sort of like utility, secondary utility items go, I take this a lot. I really enjoy the ice bow. Ice bow used to be so overpowered back in like 1.0. They've made some changes to it, but I still think it's really, I think it's what's the word? Viable. It's a very viable item. And again, you're not going to get damage out of this really. One of the things that you can use it with is if you pair it with Frostbite, the mutation, you'll be able to get It almost acts like a regular bow sometimes, where like you'll freeze the enemy and then the frostbite will start to tick the health down. So you might be able to actually kill an enemy with the bow or two of these, but it does require frostbite. But on its own, it's a great utility weapon, a really good secondary weapon that I will take a lot. Man, my mouse is so sensitive. Okay. Next up, I'm going to put all of these on the row. So a little bit of history here. So these items are the crossbows, right? So we have heavy crossbow, repeater crossbow, explosive crossbow, and ice crossbow. Prior to version 1.9, which was the update of Plenty that changed a lot about dead cells. These items used to be single-handed. So you could take the heavy crossbow and you could have a shield in the second slot. You could take the explosive crossbow and you'd have a shield in the second slot. So when they made all of these double or two-slotted or double-handed or however you two-handed, whatever you want to say, some of the initial functions kind of changed a little bit. So initially, basically what you see with the heavy crossbow now is what you had in the past. It was just you didn't have that reload. So you could shoot a little arrow out and then stun the enemy briefly and it would shoot a big wave of arrows, kind of like Contra spread shot. The repeater crossbow you just lay on it and every once in a while, one of the arrows would root the enemy, which would start the crit condition. So instead of having the volley of arrows to root, you would just constantly hammer out these arrows and they would root and you'd start getting crits. Explosive crossbow, the firing of crossbow now is very, very similar to how it used to be. You just draw an arrow and shoot it and it explodes. Ice crossbow, you used to be able to, I think it's, if you just pressed the button, it would shoot a little ice arrow. And then if you held the button, it would shoot like a little small array of arrows that would do critical damage. Ever since 1.9, like I said, these have all been two-handed, and once they made these changes, I was ripped. I was not stoked about any of these because I had used heavy crossbow and I had used repeater a lot, losing that second slot, and you could be so OP with this, right? You could take heavy crossbow in your main hand and you could take the rampart shield in your secondary and you could just parry and get 3 seconds of invincibility. This was before they implemented new boss damage caps, so you could just like shred through bosses so quickly. I understand why they made these all two-handed items. That long-winded, probably unnecessary history lesson aside, I like all of these in their own way. And I'm just going to go down the list the way that I had them here. And I'll start with the heavy crossbow. So I'm not being facetious. I said I took today off of work to, spend some time working on this and do some other stuff. I played a run this morning. I had a 5BC tactics run where I basically used heavy crossbow almost the whole run. I think I did. I popped it. I got a 4 out of the tubes and then I bought an 8. I can't remember what biome it was. It might have been, I don't know. It was before Concierge. And then I ended up getting a 10 somewhere and then I got a 12. So like I took this and then I re-rolled the 12 and I got 40% damage on it. So I used this earlier. It was such a killer run. So as I was just mentioning, you could take this back in the day with a shield in one hand. Survival, you could just tank hits and do all this stuff. My mentality with the heavy crossbow up until recently has still kind of been stuck in survival, right? Because I think of how slow it is. I think of that initial sort of exposure you have. There's like that brief pause as you're kind of like drawing the bow back, right? To shoot the arrows. Using it with tactics, personally, even though it's higher risk, I think it's dope. I think it's so good. You pair this thing with like point blank and you just go nuts. So I'm a big fan of this weapon. I'm only putting it in the usually instead of the always because there is that risk, right? There is that moment of opening yourself up before you pull the bow back, and like that's just enough time to have like a slammer you know, do a ground pound, or it's just enough time for an arbiter to hit you with a missile or something like that. This thing's great. I think it's awesome. So let me pull it up on the wiki actually before I keep rambling. Where is Heavy Crossbow? These all together? Yes. So the way that it works, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So there's 2 slots, right? So the first slot is the heavy crossbow that shoots out all of the short range bolts or arrows. The secondary ability is called reload. So what it does is when you press the secondary button, all of the arrows that come out of your next shot will be critical. As you can see, the critical, it's not huge, but like it's good. That's a really good crit, especially when you pair this with point blank, especially when you are having a higher level, you have a higher level heavy crossbow or whatever it is. I think this thing's really, really strong. And you get it fairly early, right? So you get it from the concierge after a few kills. I think it's, it's Flint and then his default outfit and then heavy crossbow, I'm pretty sure. So you can get this pretty early on. If you do take this with survival, right? So if you choose to take this with survival, I highly recommend popping a backpack, popping a shield in your backpack so you can utilize the Armadillo Pack mutation. So that way you can roll through enemies to deflect bullets and parry with just your roll. So that way there's a little bit of extra cushion, a little bit of extra defense because this item's a little slow. Another thing you can do with this is say there's 2 ledges, right? So imagine that this is a ledge, right? So here's a ledge, right? And then down here is a ledge. If you're on top of this ledge and you see an enemy down here, what you can do is before you jump down, you can do the reload, right? So you can reload to get the extra crit, you get the crits. And then when the enemy starts coming closer, you can drop down and in the air, you can use the attack. So thinking about that like dead spot that I mentioned, that brief pause, you can actually utilize the time that you're falling. So that way, when you hit the ground or when you get close to it, you will shoot. So whatever stun, or I don't even know what you want to call it, wherever you kind of like get stuck during the animation, if you do it in the air, it will negate that. So that's another kind of like tactical way of being able to use this thing. But again, super strong. You get it pretty early. If you haven't tried it, or if you haven't really, had a lot of experience with two-handed weapons, I recommend giving this one a shot. Next up is the repeater crossbow. And I don't love this as much as I love the heavy crossbow. So this is another, and all of these, I'm fairly certain that all of these are dual. Yep, so all of these are tactics and survival. So the way the repeater works is, the primary ability, it's kind of like a little machine gun, bow and arrow. And then the secondary ability, what it does is it shoots a volley of bolts that roots enemies. So basically you press the secondary ability, the bolts kind of go flying, almost like a net, right? It goes over a net. Any enemy that it hits, it will root for 3 seconds, and the primary ability will crit on rooted targets. So you're probably seeing a theme here where it's like you press the secondary ability to make the primary ability better. Personally, I don't lean on this as much as I used to before they made the change. I think it's really good if you take it with tactics, and I would actually recommend taking this with tactics because you can utilize barb tips, point blank. What's the other one? I'm blanking. But anyways, you can utilize this. I feel like tactics mutations are great for this. Just because, you'll get the more damage there. If you take it with survival, a lot of those mutations, they're not going to give you more damage, right? And if you take point blank off color, yes, it's still good, but it's not as good as it could be if you took it with purple. In addition, Wolf Trap is a skill that's also tactics and survival, so you can utilize this with that. Root Grenade is survival only, but you can definitely take that with the tactics build if you want to get additional root. But personally, this is not something that I take often, so I'm going to actually QR. I'm going to pop this in the not often section. Again, this is just preference. you know, when I first started experimenting with this, come like 1.9, 2.0, I actually like this one better than the other crossbows, but over time it just hasn't really, I don't know, it hasn't aged well, and I don't lean into it that much. Again, I feel like there are other weapons that do things better, and I prefer the other two-handed weapons. But that said, you know, like I mentioned, this does work great with barbed tips. It does work great with point blank, like a lot of these items will. And if you haven't tried this, try it out. And if you have tried it and you like it, please leave me a comment. Tell me about your experience, so that way I will have even more motivation to give this another shot. Third up of the 4 is Explosive Crossbow. I love this thing. I love it. And I take it very often. And it's great because the secondary on this is, it's not like the others, right? So the primary ability, you shoot an explosive arrow. The secondary ability is you basically slam your crossbow down. It hits the enemies, does a crit, and pushes them away. So you can use that to hit an enemy that's close, and once it gets kind of knocked back, you can then use the primary shot to do like a nice chunk of damage. I know I've said this like 100 times, pair it with Tranquility, you're in good shape. I just find this incredibly fun to use. The secondary ability, I feel is like, I don't even know the word. Overpowered is not the right word. It's silly. I think that's the word I'm going to go with. It's silly because you can just hammer that. You can just keep on hitting that secondary ability and you can just start smacking enemies. It's wild. So this one's a ton of fun. If you haven't gotten it yet, it's in the prom and it requires the 3 Gardener's keys. So you'll need all of your movement runes to get the Gardener's keys. One of them is in like a little nook that has a flower. So as you're going through the level, you're going to see like a small section where it almost looks like a tiny little garden with a flower. And if you stomp that flower 3 times, you'll get a key. The second one is hidden in a like a tower. So basically there's going to be a tower that you can run up. You'll note immediately it's really thin. You can wall run up once you get the spider rune to get the second key. And then the third key is underneath a slammable floor, just somewhere in the level. And once you get all 3 of those, there's a structure that has 3 locks that you can then use the keys to open and get the explosive crossbow. You're not going to be able to get this right off the bat, again, because you do need all of the movement runes. If you don't know how to get the movement runes, it's in my 0 BC tutorial. I kind of go over, I do go over all the runes, where to find them. So that might be helpful. But once you have all the runes, you can get this thing and it's great. I don't really have a preference if it's tactics or survival. I just take it. Oftentimes I just take it when I see it and I roll with it until I don't. But this is something that I really get excited when I see. Finally is Ice Crossbow is the last one. So I'm going to rank this. I'm going to put this in sometimes. Make sure I got my alphabetizing right here. Ice Crossbow it's really interesting. So I feel like with bosses, it can kind of drop off a little bit. So the gimmick with the Ice Crossbow is the first shot. So your primary shot, it shoots out an arrow that will freeze the enemy. The secondary shot is it's like a railgun, right? This thing is like a huge energy blast that comes out and it like knocks you back a little bit when you shoot. And what it does is it will crit any enemies that are frozen, and any bolts from the primary that are in there will come back. What's awesome about this is that the enemies do not need to be frozen from the primary ability. They can just be frozen, right? You can toss this with like an ice shield in the backpack, freeze an enemy, pop them with the piercing shot. Ice grenade, if ice armor pops off an enemy, like anything like that, you can use it. I really enjoy this. This is more of I find this more of like a biome clearing weapon more than a boss weapon, because the crowd control, bosses will start to get more resistant towards things like being frozen and being slowed or whatever. During using this in a biome, it's just fun. Some of the affixes that you can pop on this too, with piercing shot, you can get, nearby enemies, freeze other enemies when they die, and, thaw sprids to other enemies, that kind of thing. So you can almost kind of like use that with the right affixes to freeze nearby enemies and then crit them and kind of have like a nice little chain thing going. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy this. Again, not really the best boss weapon, but it is a lot of fun to use in biomes. And as I said, I take it sometimes. It's pretty fun. All right, next up, I'm actually gonna move a couple things around here. All right, so next up, I'm gonna put these two together because for a very long time, these were like the bread and butter of damage over time builds. So this is the aforementioned Alchemic Carbine and the Hokuto's Bow. So you don't need to put these two together. This is just the way that my brain is kind of lumping them in. The Alchemic Carbine shoots a poison vial that does some damage and has like a little poison cloud around it once it hits the target. It does not have ammo, and the animations are really funny because every time you pull it back, it's not the same animation. Sometimes the beheaded looks like he kind of like shoot behind his back and over his head and stuff. It's pretty cool. I like this a lot, and I do take it sometimes. And the thing that kind of like one of the first sort of like, I don't want to say backpack only, but like one of the main items that I would recommend putting in the backpack is the Alchemic Carbine, because if you have Acrobata Pack and you use whatever ranged item that you have, if that has poison synergy on it and you have Alchemic Carbine in the backpack, that poison cloud is going to give you that plus 80% on poison with your main weapon. It's going to give you a little bit of extra crowd control if you're in an area where there's a bunch of small enemies, bats in the promenade or whatever it might be. But on its own, it's not super strong. So this is a weird, it's weird because I would classify this, I know this is going to make no sense, but I would classify this as a primary secondary or a secondary primary. Hopefully you know what I mean, right? Because it's not just support enough to kind of be secondary, and it's not strong enough just to be a primary. But that said, I think it's really cool. There's some good utility there. There's some good damage. And one of the items that helps this shine is the Hokuto's Bow. So Hokuto's Bow is an item that will mark an enemy. Gets like a little red kind of crosshair mark over its head. That enemy will then take extra damage for 15 seconds. And then when it dies, what will happen is you'll see a little explosion, like a little circular pop. And any enemy that's nearby will then have the mark spread to them. This is a really good thing to use. Like I just mentioned, I even though both of these items have been nerfed in the past, I think probably once again, was it 2.4? Yeah, so like, looks like got nerfed in 3.0 and it got nerfed in 2.4. So this has been nerfed twice, but even after the nerf, I still really enjoy this. This is great to take with something that has bleed propagation, right? So think of something like if you get throwing knives that will spread bleeding to other enemies. If you pair that with a Hokuto's Bow, whether it's primary, whether you put it in your one of your main slots, you put it in the backpack or whatever, when the enemy dies that has the mark will spread, but then the bleeding propagation will also spread. So you will kind of see enemies just sort of like popping, right? I see this a lot in like the Slumbering Sanctuary, Forgotten Sepulchre, again, enemy levels that have smaller enemies like bats and stuff like that. You'll just see almost like a chain reaction of things popping. Even though this thing got nerfed, and I know that's kind of been like a point of contention for folks, I still take it sometimes. I still think it's really good. Any extra damage is good damage, whether it's, regardless of whatever it used to be, right, compared to what it is, whether it's, 144 to 104, I mean, that's still extra damage. And when you are using something like Alchemic Carbine, throwing knives, Firebrands, right? Stuff that is going to cause extra status effects and extra damage over time. The ticks are going to help with that. So I use this. I enjoy it. The old move back in the day would be, before all this stuff got nerfed, would be Alchemic Carbine in the main slot, Hokuto's Bow in the second slot. And then for skills would be like Flamethrower Turret, cleaver, whatever, because these both used to be brutality and tactics. These are just tactics only, but they used to be split. So I would take it brutality, get the higher health pool, and just shred. But yeah, nowadays, even though again both of those have been nerfed, I still think they're good. I still think they're worth taking. Put them in the main slot, throw the Hokutos in the backpack, just kind of see what happens, right? All right, so we're gonna get into, yeah, we'll do these two. So next up are two of the Everybody Is Here Volume 2 items. The first up is Throwable Objects. So these are really good. So I usually take these, right? I'm just gonna throwable. I take these a lot. So the way that these work is that they have a set amount of ammo, and whenever you use one, you'll throw in an object across the screen. It might be a knife, it might be something else. Like there's different shapes. It's like a Katana Zero crossover. You'll throw something across the screen and it will have like a really cool slicing animation. The enemy will get stunned. It's really good. Like I think I mentioned this in the melee video. It's really good with the baseball bat. It's really good to, with Nutcracker, whatever it is, and it's also good similarly to how Ice Bow can just like kind of literally freeze enemies in their tracks. This can stun enemies in their tracks to give you that extra time, as well as, inflicting the stun status. The downside to this is that the ammo does not replenish naturally and you cannot get it back from enemies. So what happens is that your ammo will decrease every time you use this. But whenever you kill an enemy, you get 1 ammo back. In biomes, this thing is fantastic because you're going to, especially on higher difficulty levels, there's so many enemies. There's enemies everywhere. So like even if you completely empty out your whole cache of these things and you have none left, you're going to kill a few enemies and get some back. So it's like a really nice kind of like, it's like a really like a good positive reinforcement cycle, right? Where you will use this to stun an enemy and then kill an enemy and get your ammo back. And, other enemies, again, I know I've said this like 1,000 times, but with bats or buzz cutters, you can kill them in one shot with this and then immediately get the ammo back. The downside to this, and this is one of the only in my opinion, one of the only downsides with this weapon, is that in boss fights, unless you're fighting like Hand of the King, where he has ads during his, first or second phases or whatever it is, you're not going to really get the ammo back. And I don't know if Conjunctivius's tentacles give it back. I don't remember. But either way, like, this is not a good boss weapon. It's not. You can use it a few times to kind of like clear the cache and, get the boss stunned. But after that, it's just going to be a waste of a slot. So if there was a way to get ammo back that was not dependent on actually killing enemies, I would easily put this up top here. But because it is not good in bosses and because sometimes you can get kind of stuck without ammo in those situations, I don't use it as much as I would if it could, if that makes sense. But I still use it a ton. And again, like I said, this is an Everybody's Here update item. You'll see this in a Katana Zero lore room at some point. You have to clear out the first 6 of the Everybody's Here Volume 1 lore rooms before the next one starts to spawn. So you have to pick up a whole bunch of items, like the Pure Nail, King Scepter, Polio Power, all that stuff. But you'll eventually see this. You should take it and you should use it. It's pretty sweet. And if you haven't used it, give it a shot. The second ranged item from the Everybody's Here Volume 2 update is the Laser Glaive. And this is I think it's a Risk of Rain. I've never played that series. I haven't played those games, but it's a Risk of Rain crossover. I don't know how that item works in that game, but in this game, what happens is you can throw this and it will hit an enemy and then it will bounce to another enemy. And what will happen is it will kind of like bounce back and forth between enemies. If you just throw it against a single enemy, it doesn't do anything, right? But if you're in an area where there's a few enemies nearby, or if you have an Inquisitor that's surrounded by a few rats, like you can kind of get like a nice little pinball thing going on here. I take this sometimes, and here we go. I take it sometimes. This is another item that is cool to put in the backpack because I personally don't think it's strong enough to be a primary. Again, that's just my own opinion with my own experience of it. I think it's a great secondary, and I think it's a great backpack item. That said, I got nothing else to say about it. It's good. If you want to play a little bit of pinball, you want to just kind of have something bounce around the screen and do some decent damage and decent crits, pick it up. Give it a shot. All right. These two, Fire Blast and Lightning Bolt, they're two very different items that share similar functions, if that makes sense. So both of these items produce a projectile, sort of like a trail, like a shooting projectiles out. So like with the Fire Blast, if you hold this down, it's almost like a flamethrower. Flamethrower just kind of shoots fire out in front of you. There's no ammo. You can just hold it forever. You can't move when you use this. Same thing with the Lightning Bolt. The difference here is that if you hold the Lightning Bolt for too long, you'll start to take damage from it. Both of these are kind of like on their own. I would say I'm going to put these in like not often, right? Because if the backpack didn't exist, I wouldn't use these too much because the damage is fine. Lightning Bolt does have better damage, but being planted makes things really challenging, especially when you're using tactics and you have like a lower health pool. It's not the best to get stuck. But now that Acrobatapack is around and the backpack exists, these things are really good to pop in there because you're getting extra damage, you're getting extra status effects, right? So you're going to get fire from the Fire Blast, you're going to get lightning from the Lightning Blast, or excuse me, shock from the Lightning Bolt. So I'm going to put Fire Blast up here in the sometimes category. So what makes this one, I know I kind of just put these two together, but if you were to separate Fire Blast, it does crits on enemies that are covered in oil, and the crits are fine, but like, you know, you get like rapid fire crits because of how quickly this thing shoots out. Throw it in the backpack, pop an oil grenade in there, get an owl that will put oil on the enemies, and you'll be doing crits a lot. The way Lightning Bolt works, and I'm gonna find out what the actual timing is on the Lightning Bolt. But basically what you do is you hold the Lightning Bolt down, and what will happen is that the damage will start to ramp up. So there you go. So it starts to wind up a little bit, and then it will have ticks of damage. So basically the first few ticks will do normal damage, which is not that great. Then the next damages will do, or excuse me, the next like 6 ticks will do higher damage, and you'll see the lightning change. So initially it's blue, then it's going to turn to yellow. That's when you start to crit. When it turns red, that's when you let go of the button, because after that you're going to start taking damage. So you basically plant, kind of like shoot the lightning bolt out, wait for it to get hot, and then stop. You can see how that can be problematic. If there's an area where enemies are charging at you quickly, there's that brief wind up period before the lightning bolt actually goes off, and then there's the fact that you're not going to be doing great damage at first, so you might just be kind of getting some like quiet damage out of this. But in certain situations this is really good. I think I might have mentioned this when I was talking about the electric whip. This is another item that I see double and quad damage on more than the others, and again, that could just be confirmation bias, whatever you want to call it. But I've, you know, double damage lightning bolt's very good, quad damage lightning bolt's insane, but you definitely don't want to take any damage. This is another item that's good to put in the backpack. So again, just like kind of like with Fire Blast, I'm going to pop this in the sometimes category. I don't usually take this as a main unless it has good affixes, unless it has that double or quad damage, but it's a fun thing to pop in the backpack. You do not take any damage from it when it's in your backpack, and you still get the same amount of ticks, right? So you get the blue bolt, and then you start getting crits. So pretty decent. Next up is Pyrotechnics. So Pyrotechnics is basically the ranged version of Fire Blast, or something similar to it. So with Pyrotechnics, you're basically throwing fireballs out. It sets enemies on fire, and it crits on enemies that are covered in oil. I don't use this thing that much, and the reason for it is like I feel like the damage output is just okay. Even when enemies are covered in oil, even when I have a high level S rank Pyrotechnics, I feel like it just doesn't deliver that much. So personally, I don't take this thing too often. When I did go through a phase like a few weeks ago when I'd see it, I would try to like take this as much as I could, but I just didn't find like it would deliver the damage. Quality is not the right word, but like there are other items that I use that I enjoy more that either set things on fire, keep me at ranged, or do more damage. But again, this is just me. It doesn't mean this is a bad item. It's just something that I haven't used that much because it just doesn't really scratch the itch for me. But I know there are a bunch of people who are way into pyrotechnics. So if you like it, fantastic. If you haven't used it, give it a shot, right? I feel like I've said that a few times, but that's kind of like that's the vibe. Ice shards. So ice shards has had like one hell of a history. I feel like this has been nerfed and buffed like 1,000 times. Back in the day, all right, let's see. All right, so there's some stuff missing here, right? So back in like 1.0, there was no ammo, and you would throw 3 ice shards, just like how it is now. So basically what happens is you press the button, it will shoot out 3 little snowball looking things. It slows enemies and it crits if someone's in water or in oil. It's a great secondary weapon. Again, slowing enemies, getting the crits in water is really great. But back in the day, you'd throw it and it would just have 3 little shards come out, no ammo. Then I think it was version 1.1 or 1.2. You could have ice shards in both slots, and you could just shred, right? You could toss an oil grenade down and you could just shred. And then what ended up happening is that I think it was Evil Empire, whoever it was, Motion Twin or Evil Empire, whoever was the main dev at that time, they made it so it went from 3 shots down to 1, and then they gave it ammo. And then after that, they reverted everything. So now the ammo's gone and they end up having 3 ice shards again. So it's really interesting to me as someone who's been playing for a while to see this thing sort of like start really strong with unlimited ammo and fast shots or whatever. And then to see it get nerfed and then to see it get brought back right where it started. So I find things like that really funny. Anyways, that said, like I mentioned, this is a really good utility item to slow enemies down. It does dual scale with tactics and survival, so this is great if you have a slow survival weapon, right? So think of something like the oven axe, or the tombstone, or even the broadsword. Using this as a secondary to slow the enemy between shots will allow you to get those attacks off quicker, right? So think of broadsword. It's like 3 really slow attacks. You can hit the first attack to swing the sword, use ice shards to slow the enemy, hit the second attack to get the crit with the bigger sweep attack, use ice shards to slow the enemy, and then get the third attack. So you can use this in a lot of different areas. If you do take it with survival and you do want to use it as that secondary between your primary shots there, I recommend taking the kill rhythm mutation, which increases the speed of your attacks if you alternate them. So basically your ice shards are going to come out faster, your slower attacks are going to come out faster. And overall, this is like a really good utility weapon. I take this a lot, and there you go. I take it a lot. Again, I feel like my play style, at least with ranged or with tactics, I feel like I've been using those interchangeably, even though there's a lot of dual scaling things here. Even though my play style, it's like I've kind of settled into like primary, secondary. And I guess that's normal or whatever, but it's like I will take ice shards if I have something good as a primary weapon that I do want to use to slow things down. And sometimes it's just nice to use in a pinch, right? You're in a shop and you're buying something and all of a sudden a mimic pops out. You can use the ice shards to slow it, roll behind it, get your bearings, and start attacking, things like that. So super solid. I really enjoy it. Next up is magic missiles. So this drops from the arbiters in the cavern. So those are the enemies that have like the hands for heads, and they start shooting projectiles at you. I don't want to say gimmick. The feature of this item is that it does not have ammo, and it tracks. So you can use this, like if you're fighting the giant and you're on the ground and you start mashing it, it will shoot up. It's really useful in certain situations. I feel like there's no crit condition with this. So basically what you get is what you get. But what you're doing is you're trading that extra damage for the utility of having this seek and move. And you're also, there's no ammo, so you can just continually shoot this thing off. I'm torn with this because I feel like this and Pyrotechnics are very similar. They're very similar for me because like I think that there's utility there, but personally it just doesn't do it for me. And it got buffed. I think it, again, might have been 2.4. The what's your damage update. I'm pretty sure that's when it got buffed. It's fine, but again, personally speaking, it's not something I gravitate towards because there are other items that I enjoy that, get me what I need, gets me the damage, gets me the crits, gets me whatever. And again, that said, I feel like I keep qualifying. I keep qualifying what I'm saying by like, hey, if you haven't used this, you should use it. That's true with anything. Right? That's true with anything that I'm going to talk about here, or anything except for the beginner's bow, basically. But, if you haven't used it, use it. And if you like it, keep using it. One of the other things, and I used my melee tier list for this purpose as well, is to, once I get through all of these things, and we have, there's only one row left. This is actually going pretty quick. Once we get through all of these things, basically, I'm going to go back and look at my final tier list. I'm going to look at the not offens, I'm going to look at the rarelies, and I'm going to reevaluate some of the stuff that I haven't used because I might be missing something, right? Like I just mentioned, even though I advocate for multiple play styles and trying everything, I don't use quickbow that much. Maybe my recollection isn't the best, right? Maybe it does do better damage, or maybe there are other situations that I can use it in where it's going to be more beneficial than I thought. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm going to go back after this, maybe start a custom run with only, the things that are on these two rows. Maybe I'll do that and, see how things go. In the melee tier list, I put the sewing scissors in the not often category because I just didn't use them often. Some folks were basically like, hey man, you should use those things. You should take the scissors and rock out with them. And I said, yeah, okay, I should. You're right. And I've been using them, and I use them a lot now, right? So if I were to redo my melee tier list, here we are like a month and a half later or 2 months or whatever it is, I would put the scissors up and usually because I went back after my last list and was like, all right, these people are recommending these items that I may have overlooked, or I may have put these in a lower ranking. So all of that said, even though I'm ranking things here, again, right? It's not best. Everything can be good. And it just may be that the situations I'm in have not been super conducive to having these items be good. And having those items feel good is what I meant to say. And the other thing too is like, if I got a rockin' build, right? If I got a really strong infantry bow and I have Hokuto, whatever, I got something else. I got my throwable objects as my secondary, and magic missiles come up. I'm not going to take that step in the different direction if I already have something that I feel good about, unless I'm trying to like break things up. But normally my brain, I just kind of like, do I want this? No, I got a good build. So that's a really long-winded way of me saying that, again, everything here is fine. Everything here is good. Take everything, don't take everything, right? Everything here is useful, but it's nice to look at this already and realize like, yes, even though I don't use these often, and I did say the damage is a little low or whatever, they're worth trying out. So I will go back and do these. If you haven't used them, use them. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, folks. I feel like I'm just putting myself in a corner where I have to justify the fact that I don't use magic missiles that often. But at the end of the day, I'm just one dude talking into a microphone in an empty room about a video game. That's it. I use my thumbs to press buttons, and then I think about things, and now I'm talking about them. So not that big of a deal. All right. Next up is the Boomerang. So Boomerang is sick. I like Boomerang a lot. This is another item that you can use as a primary. You can use it as in the backpack. what the boomerang does is basically what will happen is you shoot it out, and it's like a Legend of Zelda type thing. It goes out and it will return back to you. What happens though is it will pass through an enemy, and then on its way back, it will do damage. So imagine if this is the enemy here. You shoot the boomerang out, it will go through, and on its way back, it will hit, 4 or 5 times or whatever it is before coming back to you. You can grab the ammo mutation with this and to have 2 boomerangs, which is really powerful. I find this to be really, really enjoyable. Some of its blind spots or weak spots, however you want to say it. If enemies are not on the horizontal plane, right? Enemies like demons that are kind of bouncing up and down, or flying up and down, I should say, or other things, like it may not be as strong. But in general, I find this is really enjoyable. And again, even just popping it in the backpack's good, because you're going to get that extra damage as it goes out and comes back as you're using your primary items too. So as if you couldn't tell, I really enjoy Boomerang. It's pretty fun. Next up is the barrel launcher. So the barrel launcher comes from the Derelict Distillery, which I know a lot of people do not care for. This item is very unique. So the way that the barrel launcher works is it shoots out it's like a little cannon, and it shoots out a barrel just like the ones that come from the infected workers or come from the barrel traps in the distillery. The gimmick with this is that if it hits a wall, it will do a critical damage. So if you have a barrel launcher, right, think of like the Hand of the King fight. If you bring a barrel launcher into the Hand of the King fight, what you can do is you can turn around and shoot the barrel off of the walls, like those electricity walls that pin you in the arena, and it will do critical damage. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. It has some interesting, movement tech's not the right word. It has some interesting use scenarios. The downside is that the enemies can like bounce them back at you. So I have a clip of it somewhere. Basically, I was in the castle and I used the barrel launcher to attack one of the Royal Guard guys that jump up and slam the ground like they're the worst dudes. He started like, I don't know what the right word is, but he kind of like charged at me with his shield, and the barrel got knocked back into me and I took damage. So like, that's kind of tough, right? That's kind of tough, but it's super unique. If you haven't used this or haven't seen it before, in the Derelict Distillery, there is a lore room that always spawns that will have a guaranteed colorless, unsellable barrel launcher. So if you want to try it out, you can grab it, take it from there. It drops from the infected workers. And it's, I think it's I'm pretty sure it's a 0.4%, 0.4% drop, right? Yeah. So it's a pretty rare drop. This is, if you do want to check this out and have it in your inventory, instead of just grabbing the colorless one for that one level, you're going to want to take, the Hunter's Grenade to the distillery, because trying to drop this thing naturally in such a hostile and volatile environment is, that's going to be pretty challenging. But yeah, it's really interesting. And, I do take this sometimes just because it's different, right? It's different. It kind of like has that sort of like new life, energy that Evil Empire has brought to the game with their kind of like wacky ideas and different items and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's really cool. Give it a shot. Next up is Money Shooter. So the Money Shooter throws money. You cannot use this if you do not have money. And I think every time you shoot it, it drops, I think it's 80 gold. I was wrong. So it fires 150 gold that does critical damage. So late game, this thing is awesome, because if you are not spending a lot of money, if you are getting a bunch of your drops from chests and from enemies and from random drops or whatever, instead of spending money all the time, you're gonna be sitting on like a nice pile of cash. And what better way to use that than to throw it at enemies and get really good critical damage. I use this thing a lot. There we go. I use it a lot. Again, early game, not the best, just because, you know, you're going to want to start to reserve your resources for food shops, better items, etc. But if you have the money for it, use this item. If you find fragments of a Philosopher's Stone, don't look back. Just start chucking money everywhere. It's funny. It's good. It does great damage. And it's cool too, because like there's kind of like a little wind up. The beheaded will like swing it over his head like a lasso, and then he'll throw the money out. But yeah, I usually take it. I think it's a lot of fun. Next up is the Peril Glyphs item. So what do we got? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10. Only 11 left. Wow, this one's going pretty quick. Peril Glyphs are an item that you get from beating the first boss rush. You can do this on 0 BC. So what this item is that it does more damage when you have less health. If you're familiar with the Frantic Sword, which is a brutality melee weapon, that does criticals when you have less than 50% health or more than 5 melees. What this does is that depending on how much health you have, it will have a certain amount of attacks in the combo, right? If you have full health and you're only going to shoot like 1 attack, one little glyph comes out. If you have this much health, you'll have 2 attacks. This much health, you'll have 4 attacks. It starts critting. I don't remember exactly what number it starts critting on. Is it the 3rd? I guess it's the 3rd. I don't know, but it will start to crit. Yeah. Hey, DG, why don't you read? After the 3rd hit, from there on, it will do crits. And again, the less health you have, the more shots you have. And as you can see here, the breach goes up with each hit, and the damage is pretty good. I find that when I have really low health, I will take this thing, because I find that the last hit of the combo, it's like this giant red flame thing that comes out. I find it really satisfying. I like the sound effects. It almost sounds like someone's breathing. It's like ha, 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 every time you shoot it. And depending on how many projectiles you shoot based on the amount of health you have, the beheaded will have like a circle and will like start drawing lines around him like he's casting a spell. I think it's super cool. Unfortunately, like at higher health, which is kind of where you want to be with tactics, since this is a tactics only weapon, it doesn't do that much damage. However, like I just mentioned, you know, the lower the health, the more attacks you have. So I take this sometimes, and this is more of a, there you go. This is more of a thing that like I will take in a circumstantial situation where I'm down on my luck. I just got rocked by a couple of elites. You know, I don't want to use a flask because it's early on. There's no food shop in this level, but I do want to kind of try something to get me in a better position to succeed without healing and without leaning on all the stuff I usually have. I'll grab Peril Glyphs. I think it's really cool. If you haven't gotten it yet, go through that first boss rush, unlock it, take some damage, and try it out. I think it's a really unique item. I think that was boss rush was like 282930. I forget what it was. So it's like a relatively newish kind of item. But yeah, I recommend it. It's a lot of fun. Boy's Axe. So this is not a crossover item, but it does reference the God of War, whatever year it was, 2018, the PS4 God of War. What you do with this is that you throw the axe out, and I believe it's tactics and survival. Pretty sure it's both. Gotta find it. Yep, up top here. Yep, tactics and survival. It roots, and when you recall it, it will do extra damage. So it used to be, one of the metas used to be double Boy's Axe with double ammo. So what you would do is you would just hit both buttons consistently, and you would root the enemy, and then as you pulled it out, it would do a bunch of damage as it came out. Now I feel like the meta is completely different, where this is a great item to, you know, similar to like what I said about the ice bow or throwable objects, like it will stop enemies in their tracks if they can get rooted. But what's great is that the root lasts for a while. I don't know if it says how long. Yep, doesn't say how long the enemy actually gets rooted. It's great. Use this thing with Nutcracker. Yep, you can see here, Nutcracker, baseball bat. This thing's great with baseball bat. It's just like a really good utility. It's a really good utility item. I don't recommend putting this in the backpack because I feel like this is something that you would want to be really mindful of using it. You don't want it to just kind of get tossed out. And also because you do extra damage when you recall it, I'm fairly certain there's no way to actually recall it once it's out of the backpack. So this is more of a purposeful secondary item that I will take sometimes. There we go. I don't take it usually, just because I feel like, again, it's like really specific with what it does. But when it fits in that kind of build, and this is more of like a survival type thing, when it fits into that style of build, it's incredibly powerful and it's a lot of fun. I think it's great. All right, War Javelin. So this is such a funky item. So originally, what would happen with this thing? It has one ammo, and when you throw it, what happens is it would just kind of get lodged in a wall, and it would sort of like pierce a bunch of enemies and pin them up against the wall. Back in the day, you would have to it would either come back to you after 10 seconds like it still does here, or you'd have to go pick it up, which was kind of a pain. As of version 1.9, what happens is that if you use it and you press the button again, you will teleport to the location of where the War Javelin is, right? So if you throw it across the screen and it gets stuck in a wall, if you press the button again, you'll teleport right over there. So when the Fatal Falls DLC came out, there are these enemies called I think they're called Cold-Blooded Serpents. They're basically like the big snake cult people. They have War Javelins. So they throw the War Javelin and then teleport to it. And like, I screamed when I saw that. I was so excited because it was such a cool thing to see other enemies utilize a skill that I've been using. Like, it was just a really cool kind of like in-universe way to like tie things together. I thought it was really cool. I like War Javelin a lot. It does pale to another item that I'm going to talk about later, if you were to compare the two side by side. But this is a lot of fun. So it does good damage. It impales. It will do extra damage to enemies that are close to walls. And it kind of adds some extra fun movement tech. Like speedrunners will use this to kind of like get out of bounds or like, teleport through doors they're not supposed to go through. But even just using it normally, I find it a lot of fun. I take this thing usually. Here we go. You can find this in the cavern. So at the end of the cavern, before you go into the giant fight, you'll notice on the way down towards the giant boss room, there's like a little hole in one of the walls, in one of the floors. You can drop down through that hole and then roll over to a platform that leads you towards another platforming section. And what you want to do is pop your head off to climb a wall, open a switch, and then climb up the trap area to get the War Javelin. Again, it's really fun. It doesn't do much in boss fights, unless you want to accidentally teleport yourself into the giant's lava or directly into a conjunctivious slam attack, like whatever. But in biomes and as like a secondary, it's a lot of fun. And like I said, the movement tech with this is pretty cool. Brief pause here. So what we're looking at here is all of the non-5BC, non-DLC items, ranged items that are in the game. Technically, Boy's Axe and War Javelin, I think it's just, and Magic Missiles are part of the Rise of the Giant DLC. That's free. I'm pretty sure it comes packed in at this point. I don't qualify those as DLC because it doesn't cost anything. And again, if you were to buy the most recent, Return to Castlevania physical copy of the game, Rise of the Giant's already going to be on there. I'm pretty sure if you just download Dead Cells on its own, Rise of the Giant will be on there. So I don't qualify these as DLC. The next two items are the last non-DLC items that I'm going to talk about, but they are the 5BC items that I mentioned. So again, if you're not interested in learning about these yet, if you want to hold off, find the timestamps in the description and skip ahead to Blowgun, because that's going to be the one that's after these. So if you do want to know about these items, I'm going to talk about them now. So first up is an item called Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is a throwing axe that inflicts bleeding, and it does criticals on enemies that are bleeding or poisoned. This is a very slow item, so I'm fairly certain at this point that Hemorrhage is, how do you spell? Hemorrhage is like such a weird word to spell too. Here we go. It's like, what a strange looking word, right? So it's tactics and brutality at this point. And the reason for that is that as far as status effects go, bleeding is kind of shared between tactics and brutality. As is, and poison's more of a tactics thing, but bleeding is kind of like in between, right? So you have stuff like Cleaver or Blood Sword that is tactics, that's brutality only. And then you have things like this, that like Hemorrhage or throwing knives, knife dance, things that are kind of in the middle. This originally used to be survival in tactics. So using this as a survival ranged weapon was great because it's super slow. I'm saying all of this because like I agree logistically with why this is brutality in tactics. I understand it and it makes a lot of sense. This item is so slow though, and I used to play it with survival so often that like it's almost difficult for me to wrap my head around it to take it with brutality. This thing is powerful, and one of the ways that I really enjoy using this is it has great breach. It can stun enemies pretty quickly. So imagine that you're fighting an elite and you have a little bit of distance between the two of you. You can throw one of the and it's got 5 ammo. You can throw one of the axes, and what will happen is it will cause the enemy to bleed, and there's like a brief stun, right? There's like a brief pause where the enemy will kind of like recoil. And then that gives you enough time to throw another axe in another axe. So you can stun lock elites with this really quickly. You can rock the concierge with it. The downside, like I said, is it's really slow. The good thing though is that it causes the status effect that it self-synergizes with. So that second axe throw against that elite or a concierge or whatever will crit. If you have something like the Alchemic Carbine in your backpack and you throw this out, it will crit because of the poison. So I think it's really interesting. It's pretty cool. I use this sometimes. Again, hardest thing is like trying to alphabetize these things. It's really interesting. Again, if you have made it to 5BC and you haven't grabbed this yet, pick it up. You might actually find it as a legendary because even though if you're not on 5BC and you haven't unlocked it, there's a very, very small chance that it will pop up as a legendary. Basically, any item can show up as a legendary either from an enemy or on a legendary altar, even though those odds are skewed towards the things that are already in the item pool. So you may not have played 5BC and you might see this thing. If you see this, give it a shot. If you're not on 5BC and it pops up as a legendary, just take it because that opportunity is pretty rare, and I think it's something that you should check out. On the exact opposite side of this is the Sonic Carbine. I almost said it used to be called Sonic Crossbow. It's a Sonic Carbine. This is, I think in my 5BC video, I described it as like a magical assault rifle, and I'm going to stick with that. So it basically shoots off a ton of bolts really quickly. It does decent damage, but where it really shines is in boss fights where you can use it with barb tips, use it with point blank, or whatever it is. In general, it's a very strong weapon, and I take this thing all the time, especially if I am wrapping up a 5BC run. I find that this is a very solid item that I can use to get a flawless at the end of that content. But even in general, it's just like a fun weapon. Again, using this thing with barb tips, point blank, throw a trap down and use support. You can do that on any boss just about, and you can rock it. Just like I said with Hemorrhage, if you do not have 5BC available to you, and this pops up as a legendary just by chance, do not hesitate to pick this thing up and run with it. Again, because it's gated so late in the game behind the content. If you do happen to see it by chance, just pick it up and use it. It's pretty sweet. All right, so now we're gonna get into the DLC. So Blowgun is from the Bad Seed DLC. These two items are from the Queen and the Sea DLC, and then the final three are from the Return to Castlevania DLC. So unfortunately, from this point on, you need to pay for these ovens. You got to pay for these. The good news is, spoiler, I use all of these. I think they're all really good in their own right. So I usually use Blowgun, and the reason for it is the crits on this thing are ridiculous. So the way that Blowgun works is it's just like the are they banished? They're called Blowgunners. So they're just like the Blowgunners in the Morass of the Banished in the Bad Seed DLC. They quickly shoot out a very small, very powerful dart. The gimmick, I don't want to say gimmick, what makes it really shine is the amount of damage that you can do when you hit an enemy in the back. So you can see here the crit, what is that, 1/6, right? Give or take. It's about 1/6. The crit is 6 times as strong as the normal hit. This thing is a ton of fun. And in addition to it, it inflicts poison. So because it shoots so quickly, and because it has the potential to do so much damage, and it has the potential to spread poison really quickly, this thing is very powerful. I enjoy this so much. It's a fairly common drop. So 1/7, I think, it's not rare. It's technically, I don't know if it's common or whatever you call it, but like this is just like a normal blueprint that will pop out. I think it's really strong. It's really fun. I love taking this straight out of the tubes in the prisoners' quarters because like even on 5BC, the poison does good damage. The crits will kill almost anything in one hit, and it's great. You can use this as a primary. You can also use it as a secondary, depending on your play style. But I think this thing shreds. It's a lot of fun to use. The next two items are from the Queen and the Sea DLC. And the first one is called the Kill. Oh, my mouse is so sensitive. I am so sorry. I feel like every time I go to click something, it just rolls a little bit. The first up is the Killing Deck item. So this is really cool. So I have a video up on my channel. I think it's called just like Random Tactics, and it's a edited long play of a 5BC run, but I use Killing Deck a lot in that video. It's a homage to Gambit from the X-Men, and basically what it is that you will throw cards, and the first 3 button presses, the first 3 attacks will throw cards out. The 4th attack, what it does is it recalls all the cards that come back to you, and it does critical damage on the way. The damage itself is good. The cards come up pretty quickly. I really enjoy the attack pattern on these, but it feels very satisfying to pull all the cards back and just see enemies that are close to you get taken out or get critical. I use this thing sometimes. HA to EG. I use it sometimes. It's a lot of fun. I think as far as the DLC items go, this is the least favored of the 6, but it's still quite good. Again, and it's interesting too, because this is one of those things, along with like the Queen's Rapier and some other stuff, where the DPS looks small. It looks small, but that doesn't mean that it's not doing damage. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's basically like you'll see the number, right? So you might see that, like, I don't know, the barrel launcher has a higher number when you look at its item description than the Killing Deck, but this still does good damage. That's just calculation based over certain amount of time, but it's still really good, right? And that's like the lesson too, is like, even though you might see a number that's a little bit lower than something else, like it's still worth trying out, because this surprised me. I saw the numbers, I was like, I don't know, this looks really weak. I'm not sure if that's going to be fun. Same thing with the Queen's Rapier from the same DLC. The numbers look pretty low. I'm like, I don't know, but it became something I really enjoyed using. So next up is the Gilded Yumi. This is my favorite ranged item in the entire game. I am a preacher of the Church of the Yumi. I mentioned earlier when I was talking about War Javelin that there was another item that outranked it, and that is a Gilded Yumi. So the way that this bow works is you shoot a very heavy arrow. So there's 2 arrows in the quiver. You shoot a very heavy arrow that flies out very quickly. It pierces everything in its path, and it does criticals up against a wall. The way that this item looks and acts, it's almost cartoony. It's almost like too ridiculous when you see it, because it goes so fast and it impales things so quickly that like enemies will just disappear. They'll disappear and you'll hear the critical noise, and then the cells and the money will start coming in off screen because you killed them so quickly. Again, this is similar to some of the other things that I've mentioned before. This is not the best weapon to take into bosses, but this is like, I enjoy using this more than anything else on this list. Again, doesn't mean it's the best one. It's just, for me, when I see this thing, I pick it up. If I see it in the tubes in the prisoner's quarters, I take it immediately over almost anything. This and like the symmetrical lance. If I see either of those, I'm taking them. If I am going through the game with like a decent build and I see this pop up in a shop or something, I'll put it in the backpack and I will laugh hysterically as I throw a Firebrand and watch an entire row of enemies get pinned to the wall because this thing is coming out of my backpack. It's so strong. It's so fun. And again, like, you know, the way that I felt in my melee video, the way that I felt about Alucard's sword, that's the way that I feel about the Yumi. I think it's incredibly strong. It's super fun. It's ridiculous. And it's my favorite, personal favorite at this point. It's my personal favorite ranged item. The way that you get it is you have to fight the servants at the end of the lighthouse. So really quickly, let me see if I click on this, if it's going to bring me to all the servants. It is perfect. Okay. When you are in the lighthouse, there's 3 servants, right? So the first one is Calliope, and she has the wrecking ball. Next up is Euterpe, or Euterpe, however you pronounce it, and she's got the Gilded Yumi. Finally is Cleo, who has the bladed tonfas. So the way that you unlock the servant's outfit, the servant's items, the last servant that you killed is the item you will get. So if you kill Calliope and you kill Euterpe, Cleo's the last one left. If you don't have bladed tonfas, when you kill her, she's going to drop that. So if you want the Yumi, what you need to do is get rid of both of the melee servants before killing Euterpe. So as you can, get rid of this, get rid of Calliope, get rid of Cleo, and then finally defeat Euterpe, and she will drop the Gilded Yumi. Again, I can't say enough about this. The weapon's awesome. I love it. I love it so much. Finally, the last 3 items. These are all from the Return to Castlevania DLC, which I enjoy very much. I think I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in my melee video. I've been playing Castlevania games like forever. I played the first Castlevania on NES when I was like a kid. So much fun. I collect Castlevania music. It's like, I'm a huge Castlevania fan. So to see these items in the game, it's really exciting, and I think that they're all implemented very well. First up is the cross. So the cross is dropped by the bone throwers, which are the skeletons that you'll find in the Castlevania DLC. The way that this item works is you'll shoot it, and what will happen is like you shoot the cross out and it will like spin in place, and then it comes back to you. It does negligible damage on its way there, but once it hits here and it starts spinning, every single hit of that spin does a crit. If you have an enemy, I don't know, Mama Tick, right? Mama Tick doesn't move that much. The giant's hands don't move that much. If you have an enemy that is going to be pinned in place and you are able to get them with the cross, it does so much damage. It's wild. Again, unfortunately, the positioning is a little tough to kind of like get that distance between you and the cross just right. And again, if you don't hit the crits, it's really not that strong at all. But when you do get the crits, it's incredibly satisfying. I take this thing a lot. I really enjoy it. You can use the ammo mutation with this to basically throw out 2 crosses, get double the damage. The crit noise is just constantly, it's just constantly ringing. Another thing too is that if you are going through boss rush and you're using assist mode because you're just trying to get cells or you just want to get the outfits because boss rush is a pain, most of the time. If you turn on unlimited ammo in the assist mode settings, or excuse me, in the custom mode settings, and you throw press to attack or hold to attack in the general gameplay settings, you can hold down your attack button and it will throw out like 1,000 crosses. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating, and I am, but like it will throw out so many crosses that it will basically just be a solid stream of the cross sprite rotating and flying everywhere, and like it will decimate bosses. So when I first unlocked, I haven't done this legitimately, but when I first unlocked the Radiant Triumph outfit, which is the flawless 5BC boss outfit, I did it on assist mode. I had everything down to 20%. I did unlimited ammo and I did the cross, and it was just like, it was wild. Just shredded everything. So as an aside, if you do kind of like lean into some of the more fun assist mode stuff, do that with infinite ammo. On its own, it's a very strong weapon. Again, positioning is a little funky. Enemies, as they're moving, might kind of move in and out of the crit zone, but when you actually get the crits, they're very strong. Next up is the throwing axe. So this is really interesting because this is a legitimate Castlevania enemy item. There are, throughout the series, and you'll notice this with the bone throwers and even the axe throwers that are in the castle in the DLC, but basically like old school Castlevania, imagine like right here, imagine that this line is a platform, and imagine that you are a character that's going this way to make their way up to that top platform. There would be enemies up there that would throw axes in this like sort of, I don't know if parabolic is the right word, but they would kind of throw them angled at you in just the right direction, so that way it would like hit you as you're jumping, or, you know, as you're trying to get away, it would knock you into a pit or something like that. This item allows you to do that from the beheaded's perspective, which is a lot of fun. Similar to the cross, the positioning on this is, it's a little off. And one of the things that bothers me about this item, and I understand why they did this, but basically like depending on where you throw it from, it will, if it goes through a wall or if it goes through a ceiling and comes back down on another ceiling, the axe itself will actually turn gray to let you know that it's not going to do any damage. And the reason for that is that way you can't just camp outside of a wall and attack all the enemies and not get hit, not put yourself in danger. Like, I understand that. The downside is that as you're using it, sometimes it will like clip the corner of a ceiling that you don't mean it to clip, and it will not do any damage. It's a little frustrating in that aspect. But that said, I really, really enjoy this. I don't use it as much as I used to. I remember it was like a month or two ago, I was talking with Modesto in one of his videos about how great this weapon is, and it's still great. It's still great. It's just personally because I've been clipping the ceiling a lot, and because it hasn't been, I haven't been able to get as much utility out of it recently as I did. I'm going to put this in the sometimes category. I said in the throwing axe category. I put it in the sometimes category. But that said, you know, the learning curve on this is really steep. I think that it's a very interesting weapon. Again, it's super faithful to the Castlevania franchise. Anybody here has played the older Castlevania games, any of the 2D ones, you're going to be like, oh man, I get to throw the axes now. I get to be on the other side of the handle. This is sweet. But yeah, definitely grab it, try it out. And again, like, you may not even notice what I'm saying as far as, you know, it clipping through ceilings or doing whatever. You might just have a good time with it. I really enjoyed it. I think I have a video somewhere of me fighting the concierge with only throwing axes and getting a flawless, just because of how beautiful it is to like position and like throw it in a certain arc, so that way he'll walk into it and take the damage. It's a lot of fun. So, and then finally is Medusa's head. Medusa's head is legit like the weirdest, I'd say weirdest ranged item in Dead Cells. Even, yeah, looking at it's the weirdest thing. So basically, like, the way that Medusa's head works is you roll it on the ground. It will go through enemies, and then what it does is it will petrify them when it hits them. So petrify is a status effect that's specific to this item. It will turn the enemies to stone, which I think is super cool. Once you press the button again, what will happen is the Medusa's head almost does like a little wave of denial thing, and then it will bump enemies from their stone positions, and when they hit the ground, they'll take fall damage. It's a really good way to like bump enemies off ledges. This is another item. I know I mentioned that random tactics video I have. This is another item that I would put in the backpack. I put it in the backpack in that video, I'm pretty sure, and used it a lot. It's really cool. It's super different. And again, this is like another one of those like items, has like a high skill ceiling. And I remember I first got it, I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this thing. You know, it was just like, it felt so different. And I think that is what makes it super cool. Don't sleep on Medusa's head. During that tactics video, I'm in the clock tower and I have a curse, and Medusa's head like clears out enemies by accident on a lower platform. And again, I can't remember if it was in the backpack or if it was my secondary item, but it clears enemies out on the platform and basically saves me from dying to a curse. It's super cool. But again, really interesting. And I think that this is, as far as like actual status effects, I think this is the only item that inflicts a status effect on an enemy. And I'm not talking about like the symbols from the legendary bow and endless quiver. I mean like an actual status effect that's unique to that. So even that alone makes it worth trying. But again, it's super interesting. It's kind of in its own, it's kind of in its own category. But I do take this thing sometimes just because it's, you know, it's, as I just said, super weird, super interesting. Dig it a lot. I put the giant whistle after all of the ranged items to signal the end, as if like this is the end of a football game or the end of the first quarter in a basketball game or something like that. So blowing the whistle, we're done here. Looking back on this, I feel okay about all these. In case you haven't noticed, when I talked earlier, when I went on that whole side thing about not using pyrotechnics and stuff, I do harbor a little bit of guilt of not using those as much as I could have, and maybe not digging in as much as I should to give them more of a chance. But again, that's just me, right? All I'm doing is projecting my own insecurities and my own feelings into this video. So I'm going to give those a shot. I'm going to enjoy them more. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, overall, like, this is pretty, yeah, this is a fair representation of just like my general ranged playstyle. There are things up here that I will grab almost all the time when I see them. There are some great utility and secondary items here, as well as things that do big damage. And then this sort of middle ground, I feel like depending on your playstyle and depending on the things that you're used to and the things that you know, just like your general sort of the way that you go around in the Dead Cells universe, these can go in either direction, right? I can see a random person just looking at this video and being like, wait, Peril Glyphs is way too strong. Put it up there. You know, I use it more often. Throwing axes is too difficult. Whatever it is, you know, I feel like this is middle ground where it could go either way. But for me, like these are solid middle of the road items. And there we go. Beginner's Bow is the only one that ended up in Rarely. I'm trying to think back to my melee video. I think Giant Killer was in Rarely, and there might have been one or two other things. I'm not positive, but either way, this is my melee. This is my ranged tier list. Hopefully this was enjoyable. I do feel, I don't know, I mentioned, you know, projecting my own insecurities. I do feel like the melee one was a little bit more engaging. I feel like I had more stuff to say with that one. And again, it's interesting too, because that, like I mentioned, I just kind of did that one off the cuff. I just sort of like let it rip. And now that exists as like a template, I almost feel like I have to do the same template for this one. So I think I was in my head a little bit more than usual, but hopefully some of this or all of this was helpful to you. Again, there's a lot of cool information in the wiki that I've been skimming through here. Again, I'm going to put this in the video description, so that way you'll have a link in case you want to just go through and check out all this stuff. It's super useful, as you know, as you obviously saw me clicking around and checking out damage and ammo count and status effects and all that stuff. I love the wiki. I use it all the time. I'm gonna go all the way up to the top so you can see the front page. Yep. use it all the time. I'm going to pop it in the description in case you folks want to check out some of these items yourself, read a little bit more, do some more knowledge, do some more research, do whatever, you know. So here we are. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the video, I got a couple small things planned for the next couple months. And then, you know, I have a larger project that is not Dead Cells related that I'm probably going to lean into like late spring. I think I'm going to start getting into that in a few months because there is, you know, I do want to keep up with my Dead Cells stuff here. And like I said, I got a few things I want to share. So if you enjoyed this, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching all of this. If you skipped around and you ended up here, good for you for checking out the stuff that's interesting to you. Good for you for hearing about and agreeing or disagreeing with me on stuff that you are curious about. You know, Dead Cells is... I haven't played a lot of rogue light games, right? I've played Returnal, I've played Hades, I've played Isaac, I've played Gungeon, you know, Curse of the Dead Gods. I've played like a handful, right? Maybe not as many as other people have played, but for me, the amount of item variety, the amount of item synergy, and I don't just mean like, you know, bleed builds. I mean like the way that these items can work together, right? Thinking of like, you know, a Frost Blast into a Nutcracker, right? Or, you know, the way that Infantry Bow and Marksman Bow complement each other, like stuff like that. Like there is no other roguelite that I've played that really opens things up so much to give the player all of these tools to best express themselves in the way that they enjoy playing the game. So I really appreciate Dead Cells. I appreciate you. I'm starting to ramble. So thanks for watching. And I appreciate you being here and good luck.